This is Agentic Work Transformation. It's very centric to Gemini Enterprise, which, again, if you're not familiar with that, reach out to us. We're going to be talking about that a lot, but a lot of the principles that we're talking about here are applicable to any sort of AI implementation. I'm Brandon. I'm the marketing director at Promevo. I'm joined by Kylan Thomson, who's one of our solutions architects, and Brian Kinlaw, who is one of our senior solutions architects. And, for those of you that are clients, you probably encountered one of these guys. If you're working with us on Gemini Enterprise or, like another AI implementation, you probably came across one of these guys. And they're the ones that our clients tend to work with them directly, both before and after the sales process. Thanks to both of you for being here and contributing your knowledge.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon.
So, as I mentioned, today is session number 2. You can go back and watch webinar session number 1 on demand. That's where we sort of lay the groundwork of what is possible here. What can you do? How are things changing? What is agentic AI versus just like chatbot that I type stuff into? Today is maybe the perhaps the least sexy of the topics, but also perhaps maybe the most important. We're talking about the foundation of what you're going to train these agents on. What do they know? What do they have access to? How is your data structured? It sounds messy and it's complex, but it's super important. And ultimately, of all of these sessions, maybe the most important one to pay attention to, I'm going to hand it over to Brian, who is going to be your lead on this one. Go ahead and take it away.
Hey, how are you guys doing today? You ready, Kylan?
Yep, ready, Brian.
Well, have you ever had a bad day with your AI? You ask it to write a sonnet and it writes the sonnet in 30 seconds. And then you ask it to do something really simple and it gives you an inability, like a big empty egg. You can't do anything. It won't do anything. And you think you've given it enough information. You gave it the same thing you did last time. But what you realize is that it's just not grounded. It's just not there. It's not working out the way you thought it did. I think you had a good story on this.
Yeah. My dad was actually, using ChatGPT the other day, and he's trying to do a repair on his car, and he's asking it questions. And, he was lamenting some of his frustrations. And I think this is a pretty common pattern that I think if you aren't aware of what AI is kind of doing under the hood or how it works, makes a lot of sense, right? At the end of the day, these LLMs, they were trained on a ton of data, which means that in a lot of ways they are really smart, but in a lot of the ways that's almost so much information that could kind of trip them up. So in the use case, for instance, of maybe we're asking an AI a question about our car and how we can get it fixed or something, right? Because the AI models are trained on so much data, and this could be literally almost every manual for every car that's out there, right? That could cause for some wires to be crossed a little bit in the actual training data itself, to where LLMs, while they're really intelligent, they might give you a very confident response about something. One of the struggles, I think, is things like data lineage, like being able to understand that maybe this manual that it was trained on from 1970 doesn't apply to cars today in 2015. And for the most part, by the way, we can still get great responses from LLMs to give us some good advice for our cars. Definitely don't recommend asking an LLM, what is the specific oil filter that my car should use, unless you're using proper grounding techniques, because that's where that kind of whole idea of it's been trained on so much data that in some ways it can actually kind of hinder the model itself with those types of data lineage type use cases and everything. So it's just really important to be aware of that as just kind of an implication of the way these models are trained, and why it's so important to actually ground these models, as smart as what they are and as dumb as they can be. There's actually good explanations, I think, for a lot of the reasons why they can be dumb at times, and why it's good for us to leverage proper techniques to make sure that we can mitigate, some of those poor responses, as much as possible.
Totally agree. One of the things so that's why today's topic is grounding agents in your data. I mean, the journey starts down a really clear 4-step process. It starts with the prototype build, moves into what we're here today about, which is a huge step, data grounding. And it's followed by establishing a scaling and quality perimeter, which is what we're going to talk about next session. And finally, reaching a production grade deployment, which is the final session number 4. So those are the 2 sessions you'll get next week. It's a very deliberate process, and it's critical to understand that you just can't skip to the end. And the example that Kylan was just referring to, it's effectively that's what you are doing. You walk up to a browser, any browser, you type in, the name of your phone. I have a Samsung, and you say, how do I make it, insert blank, and it will find any information, any reference to a Samsung phone, and give you an answer. But it won't necessarily be the right answer for your phone. And even if it is the right answer for your phone, that doesn't mean that the newest version of the manual is the one that you'll get. So in that case, you just want to make sure that you give it enough information about your environment so that you know exactly what you're going to get when you ask the question. And in that case, what we're talking about here is having a highly intelligent person. It's just like hiring a highly intelligent person, and on the first day, instead of giving them access to everything that they need to be as intelligent as they are, you kind of lock them out. You don't give them a pass card. They are stuck outside the building, and as intelligent as they want to be, they can't get to any of the resources, any of their tools. Therefore, they're not grounded in the way that you guys think and the way that you would have them work within your environment. They don't understand much, and they're literally as good as the data that you get them to. So this session is the how of making agents relevant and trustworthy in your environment with real data. And one of the points that I wanted to make is that in almost every organization, there's been a study that's been out, and in almost every organization, there's multiple silos. But I thought it was kind of astonishing to find out that the average company has over 254 silos, 254 unique places where you would go grab a piece of information, pivot, and combine it with another piece of information, pivot again, and then maybe write an email or make a decision. Once we accept that, that the AI kind of needs our company data, we run, headfirst into this logistical nightmare which is where does that data actually live? Is it in a spreadsheet, and is that spreadsheet bound to something that is real and authentic in your environment? And has that number changed since that spreadsheet was actually built? This means, from all perspectives, the content that you're looking for that's valuable within your organization is scattered across chat logs, emails, CRM software, HR portals. You have basically walled gardens of information. The architecture to solve this relies on these application connectors that come with Gemini, and I think part of why what we want to talk about today is we want to kind of understand how those work, and to that end, I did put together kind of a little bit of a demo associated with this. So let me go ahead and pull that up and show it to you. One of the things that happens is I wanted you guys to see if you can make that out, how busy this is, how many uhs there are, how many there are, how, there's just this is a difficult conversation. It's only 2 minutes long. And the thing that I was going to show you is that when you, even though this is a very complex document, you ask it a simple question, turn this into, who's responsible, and just give me a quick answer. One of the things it does is it's able to do this in a very efficient way. It added a table at the bottom that breaks down all of the noise that we just got through seeing into Brian's task, Kylan's task, and Brandon's task, and the deadlines by which each one of them is due. I wanted to show you that before I switched to the next slide, primarily because it kind of introduces complexity, and I want you to see the complexity associated with that. So here's the next slide, and in the next slide, what we're talking about is the idea of vectorization. So vectorization means that if you look, there's a line going through this screen, and in one section there's a lower, like a bad result for Q3. And in the other, there's a series of emails that are all kind of related to that. And what it has done through vectorization is recognize that although the keywords do not match, there is a relationship between these two items. In other words, the poor Q3 results were probably related to the negative emails that we received from our customers. That is just an example of kind of how those connectors all work together, even though there's 254 in every organization. If you want to know, how does it know what's important and how to relate it to something else? It's a process called vectorization. I want to give you another example of this. Kylan, can you show the demo that you put together? Because I want to make this really clear.
This is an example of a knowledge graph. I found a good interactive website, shout out to Y-Files. This is a public-facing page. Anyone on the call could hypothetically go here as well. Completely free, doesn't require sign-on. But what we're showing here, this is an example of a knowledge graph. This is not exactly like the exact way that Gemini within Gemini Enterprise is working, but it is a very close analog. And basically, to Brian's point, right, when we're trying to create what's called a knowledge graph, there's this complicated process called vectorization, where we basically take virtually every file or every data point that you're basically piping into Gemini Enterprise, and they're creating like a vector representation of that, which basically means some sort of way of projecting that into space, if you will, literally into space. And so, but once we project it into this kind of like high dimensional space, we can start connecting similar or non-similar items with each other. We can actually find, relationships in the data. What you end up with is kind of like a messy looking spider web type data structure like this. This is the knowledge graph that we get once we actually tie all these vectors together, all these weird representations of our data. So this is what actually shows, this is a good visual that kind of shows what our knowledge graph's doing, right? It's clustering together similar sort of entities. And then you can actually hover over like a specific entity and really get down to the specifics of what is this really connecting to? Like, what are some of the other data sources within my org that this particular data source, if I'm to hover on it or something, is connected to in some way. So behind the scenes, Gemini Enterprise, right, when we query it and Gemini is going out and is crawling our various data sources, well, any data source or connector that you have fed into Gemini Enterprise, behind the scenes, an object or data representation like this exists. And Gemini is basically, you ask it a question and it'll try to find the most relevant pieces of data that exist within an organization from a complicated knowledge graph like this. And obviously, like if we were people and we were trying to navigate our own data within an organization, it would be a really hard problem for us to go through a data object like this, sifting through some sort of graph visualization and trying to figure out how to connect all the dots between all of our Disparate data within an org. And like this is actually like the real beauty of Gemini Enterprise, because instead of, if we wanted to ground our responses and we didn't have something like this, you basically would be stuck in a situation where every time we want to ground a response, we're having to manually find a document, feed it to an LLM, and all of a sudden, okay, it's grounded in our data. That might be okay or acceptable 1 or 2 times, but I think all of us can agree that like after doing that 3 times, we'd all be, beating our heads against our desk a little bit. So it's really nice that we have the ability to create all this behind the scenes without us having to worry about it. None of us have to actually navigate a disgusting mess like this, but that's what the beauty of Gemini Enterprise and grounding is all about, right? It's being able to take a very hard problem like this and completely push this away from people to where none of us have to be really fully aware that this is what's happening behind the scenes. So I just like this visual because of the fact that it really shows how complicated and messy our data can get and the real problem that it's solving for us by just trying to automatically find and retrieve these bits of information and ground its responses against. I could throw this even in the chat. I do recommend people just playing around with something like this just to realize like how crazy our data mess can kind of be at times and why it's so important that we ground. And with that said, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and let Brian kind of take back over here with the rest of the presentation.
All right. So, so one of the things that I wanted to kind of discuss with you guys was the concept of how this concept applies in a real scenario. So in a real scenario, I might ask like a generic, a generic AI, which is essentially an API with a wrapper around it, and it usually points to one of those 250 locations that I was talking about, not multiple of them. If you ask it a question and it's not immediately available in that exact data source, then it'll tell you something to the effect of, I don't have access to that information. You'll have to look it up on your own. But if it was connected to Gemini, then it would do a couple of different things. The first thing it would do is give you a good answer, a nice, well-grounded answer. But the second thing that it would do, which I think is really crucial, is it would take action. So it would not only give you that information, because it knows the context of where you're at and what you're doing, it might volunteer that, hey, I see you're working on an email over here or this presentation. Can I put it in that presentation for you? Can I organize all the people that need to hear this information and put them in an email for them, put this in an email for you, and would you like me to send it? So that's one of the wonderful things about it. It's more actionable. So again, I'm, in keeping with, explaining what grounding is, how important it is within your organization. Here's yet another example. And in this example, what you can see is the generic on the left, on the left-hand side, and the grounded agent on the right-hand side that takes said information, gives you your answer, and then turns around and offers to help you put it into an email or send it to the next recipient. All that said is it's the concept of moving from insight to actual workflow that is really something that I think you would like to understand, and having it know, for example, what your calendar looks like, or what the last thing is that you were working on, and how you could how it ties to what you just found, and having it make suggestions to you about what you should do next or what you could do next to take action is a wonderful thing about this. So again, there's the question, there's the insight, there's the next step that it tries to help you figure out and offers for you. And then there's the final step, which is the part that is most powerful for you, is the human review. So it might have the ability to see all those things, but it can't do anything without your permission. So it's not like you have to worry about it making these assumptions and making them incorrectly, because you always have the ability to correct what it's been given. And that ability is what we call the human in the loop. So one of the other things that I think you should enjoy while we're on this topic is kind of a conversation about security and access control and how those relate. And in this case, there's information that everyone uses within an organization, and that information that everyone uses in the organization is related to their work, related to their role. So in the case of a salesperson, they've got access to Salesforce. In the case of a finance person, they might have access to the financial records within the organization. And the HR person would have access to everybody's personal details. But just because the same tool is used by different groups of people doesn't mean that if I use this tool, that I will have access to HR. Think of it the same way you think of it as a badge within an organization. So I present this tool with my authentication of who I am, and that becomes its badge and its ability to go around in the organization and grab the information that I have access to. That governance is definitely 100% tied to your workflow. So you never have to worry that that someone who is supposed to have a piece of information will have access to everything else just because they're asking about the same style information, and they don't have your authority. So, what did you think, Kylan? Was there anything you wanted to add to that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I liked all the points that you covered, and just to maybe say it just a little bit differently, right? I mean, Gemini Enterprise, right out of the box, right? It's giving everyone role-based access controls. And Brian already kind of touched on this, right? But you really need to see that as if like we're giving people a digital badge, and it says this digital badge says this is where you can go within your organization to retrieve data, et cetera. That's exactly what's kind of happening behind the scenes. So you never have to worry about, Gemini going out and retrieving some data that I can't otherwise go into anyways if I were to go into the third-party application. I think another piece to just to jump back to again real quick, it's going back to like the human in the loop, which I know we're also going to be covering a little bit the next slide as well. But basically, human in the loop is a really critical piece of Gemini Enterprise. It's never going to be the case that you tell Gemini, hey, go send an email, where it's just going to go out and necessarily do that. At first, you're always going to see that draft version before it goes out there. I know Brian said that. I just want that to be like abundantly clear that, it's great that this tool has the ability to give us action capabilities, but that also comes with the implication of like, there are gates in place to make sure that we're not out here just using AI to send, 100 rogue emails or something at once. And like, there's always going to be that evaluation layer for a person to be able to actually go that last mile of saying like, yes, I want this out there, make the edits that they want to, and really have the driver's seat control of, that final decision on actually sending it out.
So what I did was I asked Gemini to find an email thread from last week and summarize it. And I want you to see, this is the part I really wanted you to see, was the fact that it's grounded. What it does is it gives you these little indicators here so that you can see where it actually received the information from. And in that way, it's not a hallucination and that it came from an authentic source and that it's real. That's one of the strong parts of using Gemini and one of the reasons it's so powerful.
This actually brings up a good point, Brian. I'm glad you showed this demo of not just are we grounding, but hey, we're also able to cite our sources, because I think we're definitely entering like an era within the enterprise of using AI a lot and, maybe sending information out to other colleagues and stuff. But I think it's still important for us to trust but verify, right? Like these tools are getting better. I think we're learning to trust them more, but at least we also have that capability to always, and this kind of goes back to like the last mile idea, concept, right? Of it surfaced all this information. It saved us a bunch of time. We probably should be still doing our due diligence of actually inspecting some of these sources to make sure things were accurately grounded. I mean, we'll definitely find that these models and everything's getting better and better with time. And it is becoming the case that you probably have to, go and inspect things a little bit less and less with time. But it's just really nice that we have that ability, right, to be able to quickly jump into these sources that would have otherwise taken a long time, to even aggregate. And so it makes it really easy to just cite our sources and make sure that the grounding was effective.
Exactly. Now, this takes us back to the human in the loop principle. And it makes you kind of question a couple of things in my mind. It makes you really wonder why, if the AI gets smarter and smarter every time I make a correction, do I need? And at some point, it gets autonomous, right? I mean, why does the human in the loop need to even be there? But the idea behind this and the reason why it's so important is that without the human in the loop, it wouldn't learn discernment. It wouldn't be able to ever be autonomous. The thing that I think humans have to worry about, and this is, I think, what I'm going to close on, I think what they have to worry about is getting so far away from the data that they lose discernment, because the AI is doing the work and they're no longer, going to the data, pivoting, getting the next piece of data, pivoting, and assembling all of the thought necessary in order to make the argument persuasive. They might lose the ability to go get the data themselves. So I don't know. What do you think about that, Kylan? What do you think about that concern?
Yeah, I mean, I know like Amazon just did a research study or something recently internally where they're starting to have more automations in place where there's like that human in the loop evaluation step, right, of trying to audit and make sure that the AI surfaced and did all the right or expected things. And I think one of their findings was that, since people are starting to enter this kind of posture of just human in the loop evaluation and stuff, that if all we're doing is evaluating, what is AI trying to do on our behalf, that can come with a little bit of risks, right, around people maybe letting their guard down a little bit because all they are is becoming approvers, right? And so
they get fatigue.
Approver fatigue, or so I'll let just say, like, I think it's like a fine line that has to be just tiptoed pretty carefully, and it's one of those things that we want to use human in the loop as much as possible where it makes sense.
Well, that wraps us up for today. I want to kind of talk a little bit about what we've done so far. We now kind of explained the idea of grounding the data and making sure that we have that it's somewhere grounded within our environment, and that talked about how important it is for the AI to kind of have tools and access to each data source that you think is important. I think the next step forward for us is going to be an actual workshop where we'll build a working version, and you guys get to see kind of the interface, how easy it is to navigate, and the things that that you might want to do and your options as you're creating it. The thing I love about it most is that it uses natural language, and so you can pretty much explain what you're trying to build, and it will help you navigate building it. It's really easy to use.
We've knocked out 2 sessions now. As you've mentioned, there's 2 more next week. I think that one is really the meat and potatoes, and why a lot of you probably signed up, because you want to build stuff. You want to see how to build stuff. Don't discount the importance of this one, though. And as much as a lot of these AI companies want you to believe in the dream of you take the thing out of the box and you throw it into your network and bing bang, you have amazing AI, there's actually some really important things to consider and work through before you do that, because you don't want, the new intern to have access to the same data that maybe the executive team has. Things like that are super important. And you don't want it to have a version of the file that was from 4 years ago. You want it to have, you want it to be able to recognize and have access to the most recent file. So don't discount this.
This is all part of our onboarding experience, and I do notice that on the screen we're talking about the 21-day Agentic Readiness Lab, and what effectively it does is we walk you through the scenarios that you're seeing us walk you through in these 4 sessions. We walk your organization through those so that you can make sure you have a 360 view of all the things that you need to be concerned with before you turn on Gemini. And we make sure you're ready to rock and roll with it on day 1 without any concerns about security or whether or not it's going to go rogue or if you're going to have any problems with it. We're pretty good at doing this, and we've been pretty successful. And this is the reason why we're doing the series.
That is a great sales pitch. Yeah, don't do this yourself. Like, you want guys like Brian and Kylan getting in there and helping you walk through it. And like he just mentioned, they have it down to a pretty formulaic, repeatable, predictable process that can get you where you need to be in just a couple of weeks. All right. With that, we are going to call this one a wrap. Thanks again to everybody. Thank you, Brian and Kylan, for doing this. Those of you out there on demand, thanks for joining us in the future. And to everyone, we will see you on Tuesday. Bye now.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.